How many of you here this morning don't mind God working on you? If he goes in and sees something in you that's not pleasing, you don't mind him working on you and taking it out of you. He says, every now and then I've got to fine tune you. Every now and then I've got to chisel you into the being that I would have you to become. And so the text tells us that after the temple was built by man's hand, it was time to place the temple in God's hand. You've got to catch that. The text says that for 7 years, Solomon in his labor for 7 years, Solomon and all his men, they built this temple. But after the temple was built, they then placed the temple in God's hand. After the temple was built, I'm trying to help somebody, by man's hand, it was time to place the temple in God's hand. And I want to suggest to somebody this morning that after building or establishing what God has prepared for your life, you must be mindful to place your work back in God's hand. I don't care what you're trying to grow. I don't care what you're trying to develop. If it's going to be successful, you've got to place it in God's hand. You want your business to grow, you've got to place it in God's hand. You want your relationship to flourish, you've got to place it in God's hand. You want your pocketbooks to overflow, you've got to place it in God's hand. After you do your part, you've got to step back and then say, God, have your way. Do whatever you want to do, however you want to do it. And if God is in control, it will prosper. If God is in control, it will flourish. The text says that after the men had built it, they then stepped back and placed it all in God's hand, because they understood here's how it worked. God gives you a vision, and when God gives you vision, he'll always give you provision. Look at somebody and say, when God gives you a vision, he'll give you provision. And so he says, I'm going to supply you with everything that you need so that you can build this house of the Lord, that you can build this temple. But after I provide you with everything you need, you must begin to work what I've given you. I want to tell somebody it's time to work what God has given you, your talents, your gifts. You can sing, it's time to work what God has given you. You got a creative mind. It's time to use your mind so that God can get all the glory, honor, and praise. He says, I'll give you the vision, I'll give you provision, and then you must work it, and you must work it until it becomes fruition and production. He says, I've given you something so that you can produce something. I didn't give you something so you can sit on it. You remember in the New Testament, there were men that God gave talents to, 1-5, 1-2, 1-1. He says, now go out and work what I've given you. I've given you everything you need to make sure that this thing blossom and flourish. But the Bible tells us that the one who only had one talent decided he was going to sit on his talent, but the one that had 2 and 5 decided they was going to work it. And so consequently God said, because you work what I've given you, I'm going to give you more. I'm going to multiply it. So in a real sense, God is saying that when I give you a vision, you have to begin to work that vision until it becomes fruition or production. And then after you've got some production, give it back to me and I'll begin to multiply it. Is it Bible? Yes, it is. One man plants, another man waters, but only God can give you the increase. Oh, let me stay in Bible land just a little while longer. Come here, Abraham. I'm giving you a vision. What's the vision? That I'm going to have a son. And so he says that later on, Abram and Sarai conceived, and then they had a child by the name of Isaac. And oftentimes we misunderstood this point. That is, that when Abram takes Isaac up to the mountain, he's not really getting ready to sacrifice him. No. What he says at the bottom of the mountain is that my son and I shall return. Abram knows something that we oftentimes overlook, and that is that God will make a way out of no way. I don't know how God's going to bring me through this. I don't know how God is going to turn this around, but God is going to do something. And so in a real sense, Abram is not going up to offer up a sacrifice, but he's going up to give back to God what God gave him in order for God to multiply what he gave him in the first place. I lost you. Can I give it to you again? He says, I'm not getting ready to go up and have my son slain. I'm getting ready to go up and give back unto God what God gave me so God can turn around and multiply and expand my territory. And later on, God said, as the sands are, so shall your seed be. And I'm simply trying to tell somebody this morning that many of us, we produce, but we do not reap multiplication because we fail to complete the last task, and that is give it back to God. And if you want anything to grow, you've got to give it back to God. Look at somebody and say, you've got to give it back to God. You done worked this dream. You done brought it to fruition. You done brought it to production. But now you're wondering, when is my business going to multiply? Now you're wondering, when is this dream going to take off? Now you're wondering, when is my vision going to multiply? And God is saying, I just need you to come back to me one more time and place it in my hand, and I'll begin to expand your territory. I'll begin to bless you. Indeed, is there anybody here this morning that says, I want God to expand my territory? Is there anybody here this morning that says, I want God to bless me? Indeed, I want God to bless my work. I want God to bless my writing. Well, whatever you want God to bless, you've got to be willing to place it all in the master's hand, because the songwriter was right. Little becomes much when you place it in the master's hand. Look at somebody and say, little becomes much when you place it in the master's hand. And so Solomon understood that the temple was complete, but he said, nah, it's not really complete until we place it all in God's hand. And so our text tells us in 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 10 and 11, watch this, that after construction, but before consecration, when the priest came out of the holy place, and you know what the holy place was. The holy place was the place that had a lampstand to remind us that we ought to be a light unto this dark world. The text says that when the priest came out of the holy place, you know what the holy place is. It's the place that had the altar of incense, which is a reminder that we should always be sending up some praise and some prayer unto God. And I wish we could just pause for 5 quick seconds and send up some prayer and some praise unto God for what he's doing in your life. Here the text says that when the priest came out of the holy place, of the place where they have the table of showbread, to remind us that we should always be in fellowship with God. The text says that when the priest came out of the holy place, that a thick cloud filled the temple of the Lord. You missed it. You missed it. The text says that when the priest came out of the holy place, then the presence of the Lord filled the whole. You missed it one more time. The text says that they had worked this building, they had worked this temple, they had done all that they could do for a span of 7 years. It looked like it was a wonderful masterpiece. It looked like it was a wonderful piece of artwork, but the text says that it really did not begin to serve its purpose until after the priest moved out of the way and allowed the Holy Spirit to fill the temple with his place. If God is ever to have his way, every now and then we have to move ourselves out of the way and allow the Holy Spirit just to come in and do what he wants to do. And so I've come here today to tell somebody, if the business is ever going to grow, you've got to wake up and say, let me step out the way and let God come in and begin to fill this place with his presence. If the church is to flourish, we must begin to move ourselves out of the way and allow God to come in and begin to fill this temple and begin to fill this place. If your organization is going to grow, you got to move yourself out the way and say, come Holy Spirit with all your quickening power and fill this place. And if you gonna grow, you gotta get out of your way and let the Holy Spirit begin to flow in you, begin to move in you, because you can't do it by yourself. You can't do it all alone. But if ever you can get to the point to say, I'm tired of tripping over myself, I'm tired of stumbling over myself, I'm tired of messing up things for myself, I'm going to get out the way. The text says, I don't care what you've accomplished, I don't care what you've built, I don't care how bad it is, until you move out the way. The Holy Spirit says, I'm waiting, but I need you to come off the sideline. I need you to get out my way, and then I'll begin to come in and move on the inside of you. Is there anybody?